Welcome to this explainer. If you've been following global events lately, you probably feel like the world is suddenly spinning a lot faster, and honestly, a lot more unpredictably. Today, we're going to objectively unpack a growing consensus among foreign policy experts, military strategists, and political commentators. They're all zeroing in on one massive idea. The post-World War II international order is fundamentally fracturing, and a new highly competitive multipolar world is emerging right in front of us.
So analysts across the political spectrum are raising a really pivotal question right now. Are we witnessing the definitive end of the rules-based global order we've literally known for decades? For a long time, we've basically operated under the assumption that there's a structured international system, led mostly by Western powers. But today, the very foundations of that system are being aggressively tested, and in some areas, they're being completely dismantled.
To truly wrap our heads around this paradigm shift, you've got to look at the history of global power. Think of it like a timeline. Back in 1945, the bipolar Cold War kicks off, a massive global tug-of-war between the US and the Soviet Union. Fast forward to 1991, the Soviet Union collapses, and we enter this era of unipolar US hegemony. The US is the undisputed global heavyweight. But now, looking ahead to 2026 and beyond, we are deep into a really chaotic transition toward emerging multipolarity. We're shifting from one dominant power to a world with multiple competing centers of gravity.
In this explainer, we're going to break down this overarching thesis through 6 key pillars. We'll cover the end of an era, the Trump 2.0 paradigm, Europe's fragile security trilemma, the rise of multipolar powers, tech and economic accelerants, and wrap up with the history of power vacuums.
Let's jump right into part 1, the end of an era, and exactly why this post-Cold War framework is fading away.
Political commentator Konstantin Kisin actually hit the nail on the head here, describing this shift as the collapse of a shared myth. He points out that ever since the 1990s, the West kind of lost its focus. Without a major existential rival, a real sense of complacency set in. Over time, that slowly eroded moral and military authority. The core idea is that global rules are decaying simply because the credibility and the actual capacity to enforce those rules has significantly weakened.
And that brings us to Section 2, looking at a major catalyst accelerating all these changes, the shift in U.S. foreign policy under the Trump 2.0 administration.
What's absolutely crucial here is the stark contrast in strategies. When foreign policy experts analyze the new U.S. national security strategy, they see an official rejection of a decades-old doctrine. The old way was a grand strategy of primacy, basically the U.S. seeking to be the dominant power everywhere, upholding the rules-based order. But the new doctrine? It explicitly embraces transactional Atlanticism and a strict America-first approach. It's a fundamental rewiring of how the United States interacts with the rest of the globe.
So how does this actually play out? Well, it completely redefines American interests region by region. In the Western Hemisphere, the focus turns sharply inward. We're talking border protection, drug enforcement, and leaning into the Monroe Doctrine. Europe is suddenly treated transactionally. The message is basically, allies need to pay more for their own security. And then over in Asia, the lens is almost entirely economic, focusing on GDP and trade, while actively trying to avoid the traditional rhetoric of great power competition. It's a staggering pivot away from acting as the world's police force.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, Europe's fragile security trilemma. Because as the U.S. pivots its priorities, Europe is suddenly left heavily exposed.
An interesting analysis from an IEEE opinion paper warns that NATO's survival literally depends on a structural metamorphosis. The key phrase they use is European strategic autonomy. Europe has to urgently transition from just passively consuming American security to becoming a sovereign provider of its own defense. The old American security umbrella is folding up, so to speak.
But here's the catch. Europe's capacity to step up is severely held back by its own domestic choices. To put things in perspective, Europe has just 12% of the world's population, but accounts for a massive 60% of global welfare spending. Add to that economic decisions like Germany shutting down its nuclear facilities, which created a huge reliance on foreign energy. You've got the UK dealing with skyrocketing energy costs and intense deindustrialization, and on the military front, a whopping 78% of European defense purchases are made outside of Europe. That starves their own industrial base. This is absolutely critical because you just can't have strategic independence without economic strength and industrial self-reliance.
Foreign policy scholar Robert Kagan issued a pretty stark warning about these vulnerabilities. He argues that Europe risks becoming a collection of fiefdoms of the great empires of the world right now. It's a sobering thought. Without guaranteed U.S. backing and without their own unified military and industrial strength, fragmented European nations risk just falling under the influence of other rival global powers.
It's a brutal reminder that, at the end of the day, economic and military capability dictate national sovereignty. And that warning brings us right to our fourth pillar, the rise of multipolar powers. Who exactly is stepping into this power vacuum?
If we think about this from basic first principles, the dynamic is pretty undeniable. Whenever a dominant central authority steps back or weakens, a power vacuum opens up. Geopolitically speaking, that vacuum always, inevitably, invites a competitive and often violent struggle among regional contenders who want to assert dominance in their own backyards.
We're seeing this play out right now. The Spanish Institute for Strategic Studies notes that we've entered a pre-conflict environment. The neat, clean lines we used to draw between peace and war, they are completely blurring across a wide spectrum of hybrid and conventional threats. Systemic rivals are boldly testing the waters to see exactly where the new limits are.
You can literally watch this emboldened behavior erupting across multiple theaters all at once. You have Russia launching high-intensity kinetic warfare in Ukraine. You have Hamas initiating the October 7th attacks, which deeply destabilized the Middle East. China is openly advocating for a new multipolar world order at the G20, all while keeping a very close eye on Taiwan. And meanwhile, India is rapidly rising as a highly pragmatic, major economic and strategic player. All these actors are making their moves, and it completely reflects these massive changes in global power dynamics.
Let's move to Section 5, because beyond tanks and treaties, we have to talk about the tech and economic accelerants. These are the wild cards supercharging all this geopolitical instability.
A return to credible collective defense requires massive industrial capacity. Yet, Western allies, especially in Europe, are trapped in these fragmented markets. They're essentially running 27 inefficient, separate national defense industries. To meet the immense demands of modern attritional warfare, they desperately need a sovereign industrial base. We're talking about a unified capacity to actually produce, sustain, and innovate. Because without the factories churning out the gear, deterrence is really just an empty promise.
And then there's the massive wildcard of artificial intelligence. AI-driven automation risks mass job displacement across the board. Now, why does that matter for geopolitics? Because economic anxiety fuels social unrest, pushes political extremism, and ultimately destroys public trust. When nations are fractured and fighting internally, they are forced to turn inward, and that totally cripples their ability to project influence or uphold any sort of alliance on the world stage.
Finally, for our sixth section, let's step back from the chaotic daily news cycle and look at history. What do past collapsing world orders tell us?
History, whether you're looking at ancient Greece or 19th century Europe, demonstrates a very clear, repeating pattern. Step 1, the established global rules and authorities start to weaken. Step 2, regional wars erupt as local powers start testing the boundaries. Step 3, rapid economic and technological fragmentation occurs as globalization essentially unwinds. And finally, Step 4, after a period of intense chaos and friction, a new system, or a new hegemon, eventually takes hold. Looking at the headlines today, we appear to be marching pretty firmly through those first 3 steps.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, the evidence from strategic analyses, geopolitical history, and shifting foreign policies points clearly to one thing: the unipolar era is ending. The old order is breaking down. And that leaves us with one incredibly vital, unresolved question to think about. As we enter this highly competitive, unstable new landscape, who's going to write the rules for the new multipolar world? Will it be shaped by cooperation or forged through conflict? Thanks for joining me today, and keep digging into the data. See you next time.